I watched my brand new Polaris snowmobile being dragged onto a flatbed truck through my living room window, and my blood started to boil in a way it hadn't since my days as a beat cop 20 years ago. The snow was falling heavily that February morning in Duluth, Minnesota, creating a white blanket over everything in the Pine Ridge Estates subdivision, where I'd bought my house just 6 months earlier. I'd moved here after my divorce was finalized, wanting a quiet place to live while I continued my work as sheriff of St. Louis County. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first, with its neat rows of modern houses and well-maintained streets. I should have known better than to buy property governed by a homeowners association, but the house had everything I needed, and the price was right. I grabbed my jacket and rushed outside, my boots crunching through the fresh powder. The guy operating the flatbed was middle-aged with a beer gut and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. He didn't even look at me as I approached. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing with my snowmobile?" I called out, my voice sharp. The operator finally glanced my way, his expression bored. "HOA violation, got orders to remove it." "Orders from who?" "The association president, lady named Patricia." He went back to securing the straps around my Polaris. I felt my jaw tighten. Patricia Davenport. I'd met her exactly once, during the mandatory new homeowner orientation meeting. She was a woman in her early 50s, with blonde hair cut in that specific style that screamed entitlement. And she'd spent 45 minutes lecturing me, and 3 other new residents, about the importance of maintaining property values and following every single rule in the association's bylaws. The meeting had been scheduled for 30 minutes, but she kept going, reading from a binder that must have been 3 inches thick. "You can't just take someone's property," I said, keeping my voice level even though I wanted to shout. "That's theft." The operator shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA. I'm just doing my job. Got a work order right here." He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket and waved it vaguely in my direction. I snatched it from his hand and read through it quickly. According to the document, my snowmobile had been parked in my driveway for more than 48 consecutive hours, which violated Section 12.7 of the Pine Ridge Estates Community Standards and Regulations. The penalty for this violation was immediate removal and impoundment of the offending vehicle, with fees accruing at $50 per day until the violation was resolved and all fines were paid. "This is insane," I muttered. "It's a snowmobile in Minnesota, in February. Where else am I supposed to keep it? Says here recreational vehicles must be stored in garages or approved storage facilities," the operator said, clearly having read the document before. "Not in driveways visible from the street." My garage was currently full of boxes from my move that I hadn't gotten around to unpacking yet. I'd planned to clear it out this weekend so I could park the snowmobile inside, but I'd figured a few days in the driveway wouldn't hurt anyone. I'd been wrong. "How much are the fees?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "Says here there's a $500 removal fee, plus the $50 a day storage fee, plus a $250 administrative fee for processing the violation." He scratched his chin. "So you're looking at $800 right now, plus $50 for every day until you get it sorted out with the HOA. $800 for parking my own property on my own driveway for less than a week." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was a law enforcement officer and needed to handle this through proper channels, even though every instinct told me to tell this guy to unhook my snowmobile or face obstruction charges. "Where are you taking it?" I asked instead. "Storage facility off Highway 53. You can't pick it up until the HOA gives authorization, though. That's the rule." I watched helplessly as he finished securing my Polaris and climbed into the truck's cab. The engine rumbled to life, and then my $4,000 snowmobile was being driven away down the snow-covered street. I stood there in the cold for a moment, watching the truck disappear around the corner. Then I turned and walked back into my house, pulling out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for the HOA management office. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. You've reached the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Office hours are Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Please leave a message and someone will return your call within 3 business days. 3 business days. It was Saturday morning. I wouldn't even be able to talk to someone until Monday at the earliest, and probably not until Wednesday or Friday given their limited hours. Meanwhile, the storage fees would keep piling up. I left a terse message explaining the situation and demanding an immediate callback, then hung up. I was too angry to sit still, so I decided to go directly to Patricia Davenport's house. I'd seen her name and address on the HOA documents when I'd bought the place. She lived just 4 blocks away on Maple Crest Drive, in one of the larger houses in the subdivision. The walk helped me cool down slightly. The neighborhood really was beautiful, with its mature trees and well-kept yards. Kids were out building snowmen in a few of the front yards, and I could see smoke rising from several chimneys. It would have been peaceful if I wasn't so furious. Patricia's house was a 2-story colonial with white pillars and a perfectly manicured lawn, or at least what I could see of it under the snow. There were no footprints leading to the door, no signs of activity. I rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing. I rang again, holding it longer this time. Still nothing. I was about to leave when I noticed a woman watching me from the house next door. She was elderly, probably in her 70s, with white hair and a kind face. She opened her front door a crack. "She's not home," the woman called out. "Gone to her daughter's place in Minneapolis for the weekend. Won't be back until Monday evening." Of course she was. Of course the HOA president would order my property seized and then immediately leave town. "Thanks," I called back. "You're the new sheriff, aren't you?" the woman asked. "Moved in on Birch Lane." Word traveled fast in small neighborhoods. "That's right, Paul Lawson." "I'm Dorothy. I heard about your snowmobile. Patricia's got herself worked up about vehicles in driveways lately. Had 3 people towed last month for various violations." Dorothy shook her head. "I've lived here 15 years and it's gotten worse every year. Used to be we just had a few basic rules to keep things nice. Now she's got regulations for everything." "Do you know who else is on the HOA board?" I asked. "Maybe I can talk to them." Dorothy's expression turned sympathetic. "There is no board anymore. Used to be 5 people, but over the last 2 years the other 4 members quit. They got tired of Patricia steamrolling every decision. Now she runs everything herself. Technically against the bylaws, but she says they can't hold elections if no one's willing to run against her or serve with her." This was getting better and better. A homeowners association run by a single person with unchecked authority and a Napoleon complex. "Thanks for the information," I said. "Good luck," Dorothy replied. "You're going to need it." I walked back home, my mind racing through possible solutions. I could pay the fees and get my snowmobile back, but that would just encourage this behavior. I could fight it through the HOA's internal dispute resolution process, but based on what I'd learned, that process was essentially appealing to Patricia herself. I could take legal action, but that would be expensive and time-consuming. Or I could handle this the way I handled most problems in my county, by enforcing the actual law back home. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. I started researching Minnesota property law, looking for anything that might apply to HOA overreach. What I found was interesting. Under Minnesota Statute 515B, homeowners associations had significant power to enforce their covenants and bylaws, but they still had to operate within certain legal boundaries. They couldn't violate state or federal law, and they had to follow their own procedures. More importantly, the seizure of property required either consent of the owner or a court order in cases of legitimate lien enforcement. I pulled out the massive binder of HOA documents I'd been given when I bought the house. I'd barely skimmed it at the time, which was my mistake. Now I read through it carefully, page by tedious page. 3 hours later, I'd found several interesting things. First, the bylaws did indeed state that recreational vehicles couldn't be stored in driveways for more than 48 hours. Second, violations were supposed to result in a written warning for first offenses, with a 7-day cure period before any enforcement action. Third, the board was required to have at least 3 members, with decisions made by majority vote. Fourth, any expenditure over $500 required a vote of the full board. Patricia had violated her own rules in multiple ways. She'd never sent me a written warning. She'd authorized an $800 expenditure without a properly constituted board. And she was operating the entire association without the required number of board members. I started making a list of every violation of the bylaws and state law that Patricia had committed. By the time I finished, it was getting dark outside. Sunday passed slowly. I spent most of it doing more research and preparing my case. I also drove out to the storage facility where they'd taken my snowmobile, just to verify it was actually there. The place was a fenced lot filled with vehicles, boats, and equipment. I could see my Polaris sitting in the corner, covered with a fresh layer of snow. The facility was closed on Sundays, so I couldn't even talk to anyone there. Monday morning, I was at the HOA office before it opened at 10. The office was located in a small strip mall on the edge of the subdivision, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. I sat in my truck, drinking coffee and waiting. At exactly 10 a.m., a young woman in her 20s arrived and unlocked the door. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I gave her 5 minutes to get settled, then went inside. The office was cramped and cluttered, with filing cabinets lining 2 walls and a desk piled high with papers. The young woman looked up when I entered, her expression weary. "Can I help you? I'm Paul Lawson. I live at 847 Birch Lane. The HOA seized my snowmobile on Saturday, and I'm here to resolve this situation." Recognition flickered across her face. "Oh, right. I saw the work order. Let me pull up your file." She turned to her computer and started typing. "Okay, so you have a violation for improper vehicle storage. The fees are currently $900. $900? It was $800 on Saturday. Today's Monday. That's 2 more days of storage fees." I felt my blood pressure rising again. I'd like to speak with Patricia Davenport. She's not in the office today. She only comes in on Fridays usually. Then I'd like her phone number. The young woman looked uncomfortable. I'm not supposed to give out board members' personal information. She's the one who ordered my property seized. I have a right to speak with her. I can leave her a message. I took a breath, reminding myself that this woman was just an employee caught in the middle. "What's your name?" "Jennifer." "Jennifer, I'm the St. Louis County Sheriff." Patricia Davenport violated multiple provisions of the HOA's own bylaws, as well as potentially several state laws, when she ordered my snowmobile removed. I need to speak with her directly today. Can you call her and set that up? Jennifer's eyes widened. "You're the sheriff." "Like the actual county sheriff?" Yes. She bit her lip, clearly torn between following her instructions and dealing with a very unhappy law enforcement officer. I can try calling her, but she doesn't always answer when she knows it's the office calling. Please try. Jennifer picked up her phone and dialed. I could hear it ringing on speaker. It went to voicemail. Hi, Patricia. This is Jennifer from the office. I have Paul Lawson here regarding the vehicle removal from Saturday. He really needs to speak with you. Could you please call the office as soon as possible? Thanks. She hung up and looked at me apologetically. That's really all I can do. I considered my options. I could push harder, but that wouldn't get me anywhere. Jennifer genuinely seemed like she was trying to help within the constraints of her position. Okay, here's what I need. I need written copies of all the warnings that were supposedly sent to me before the snowmobile was removed. I need documentation of the board vote authorizing this action. And I need a complete accounting of all fees being charged. Jennifer looked confused. Warnings. There weren't any warnings. Patricia said this was a flagrant violation that required immediate action. According to Section 18.3 of the HOA bylaws, all first-time violations require a written warning and a 7-day cure period before enforcement. Was I sent a warning? I don't think so. Let me check. Jennifer started searching through files on her computer. After several minutes, she shook her head. No, there's no record of any warning being sent to your address. And was there a board meeting to authorize this action? There aren't really board meetings anymore. Patricia makes all the decisions. How many members are currently on the board? Just Patricia. She's the president, secretary, and treasurer. And the bylaws require how many board members? Jennifer pulled out a copy of the bylaws and flipped through them. Her face went pale as she read. At least 3. So the board is not properly constituted, which means Patricia has no legal authority to act on behalf of the HOA. Oh no, Jennifer whispered. Am I in trouble? I just do what she tells me to do. You're fine, I assured her. You're an employee following orders. But Patricia is going to have a problem. Jennifer looked genuinely distressed now. She's going to be so angry. She gets really intense about this stuff. Let her be angry. What she did was illegal. I want my snowmobile back today and I want all fees waived. Can you authorize that? I can't authorize anything. Only Patricia can. I thought for a moment. Can you give me the contact information for the storage facility? Sure. Jennifer wrote down a name and phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to me. Thank you. And Jennifer, start looking for another job. This situation is about to get very messy for the HOA, and you don't want to be caught in the middle when it does. I left the office and sat in my truck, dialing the storage facility number. A man with a gruff voice answered. Randy's Storage. This is Sheriff Paul Lawson. You're holding a snowmobile that was removed from my property on Saturday. Yeah, I got it here. You calling to arrange pickup? I'm calling to inform you that the snowmobile was removed without legal authority and is being held illegally. I'm going to need you to release it to me immediately. There was a pause. Look, buddy, I don't care if you're the sheriff or the governor. I got a work order from the HOA, and I got authorization saying the vehicle can only be released with their say-so. That's the contract. The person who authorized the removal doesn't have legal authority to act on behalf of the HOA. The board isn't properly constituted under the association's bylaws. That's not my problem. You want your snowmobile, you work it out with the HOA. If you don't release my property, you're going to be charged with theft by receiving stolen property. I can have a deputy there in 20 minutes with a warrant. Another pause, longer this time. You're serious. Completely serious. This is an illegal seizure. Release my property or face criminal charges. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Fine. Jesus. Come get your snowmobile, but I'm calling the HOA to tell them what happened. You do that." I drove to the storage facility immediately. Randy turned out to be a large man in his 60s with a permanent scowl. He clearly wasn't happy about the situation, but he unhooked my Polaris from where it had been secured and helped me load it onto the trailer I'd brought. "You're going to have problems with that HOA lady," he warned as I was finishing up. "She's not the forgiving type. I'll take my chances." I drove home with my snowmobile safely in tow. The feeling of satisfaction lasted about 2 hours until my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Patricia Davenport standing on my porch, her face red with fury. She was dressed in expensive workout clothes and held her phone in one hand like a weapon. "You stole HOA property," she said without preamble. "I recovered my own property that was illegally seized," I replied calmly. "You threatened Randy with criminal charges. You abused your authority as sheriff. I informed a storage facility operator that he was in possession of stolen property and would be charged if he didn't release it." "That's not abuse of authority. That's my job." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You owe the HOA $900 in fees." "I owe the HOA nothing. You violated your own bylaws by seizing my property without proper warning or a properly constituted board vote. You have no legal authority to act unilaterally on behalf of the association. I am the HOA president. You're one person claiming to be a board that requires at least 3 members. According to Minnesota Statute 515B.04, any action taken by an improperly constituted board is void and unenforceable." Patricia's face somehow got even redder. "I know the law. Don't try to intimidate me with legal jargon." "Then you know you're operating outside the boundaries of your authority. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop all fees and violations related to my snowmobile. You're going to call a special meeting of all homeowners to elect a proper board. And you're going to stop harassing residents over trivial violations. Or what? Or I file a lawsuit against the HOA and you personally for illegal seizure of property, harassment, and breach of fiduciary duty. I'll also file a formal complaint with the Minnesota Department of Commerce, which regulates homeowners associations. And I'll make sure every resident in this subdivision knows exactly what you've been doing." Patricia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You think you can threaten me? I've been running this HOA for 8 years. I've fought off bigger challenges than one divorced sheriff with delusions of importance. You moved into my neighborhood. You follow my rules." "Your neighborhood?" I let out a short laugh. "Lady, you don't own this place. You're a volunteer board president who's let a tiny amount of power go to your head, and you just made a very big mistake by going after the wrong person. We'll see about that." Patricia turned and walked away, her steps sharp and angry against the porch steps. I closed the door and leaned against it, realizing this was far from over. Patricia wasn't the type to back down easily, and I just made myself her enemy. I was right. Over the next week, I received 3 more violation notices. One claimed my trash cans were visible from the street 15 minutes before the approved time window. Another stated that my front door wreath was not an approved seasonal decoration. The third said my mailbox post needed repainting because a small chip was visible. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a demand for immediate compliance. The notices were delivered by certified mail, which I had to sign for, clearly establishing a paper trail. I documented everything carefully, taking photos and keeping detailed notes. Patricia was building a case of harassment, and she didn't even realize it. On Thursday evening, I received a call from Dorothy, the elderly neighbor I'd spoken with before. "I wanted to warn you," she said quietly. Patricia's been going door to door in the neighborhood, telling people you're a troublemaker who's trying to destroy the HOA. She's asking people to sign a petition to have you fined into selling your house and moving away. That's interesting. How many people have signed? Not many, from what I hear. Most folks are actually pretty fed up with her, but there are a few who go along with whatever she says. The Hendersons on Oak Street signed, and so did that young couple on Maple Drive who just moved in last year. Thanks for letting me know, Dorothy. There's something else. I've been talking to some of the other longtime residents. We're tired of how Patricia's been running things. If you're serious about forcing a new board election, we'd like to help. This was exactly what I'd hoped would happen. I'm very serious. How many people are we talking about? I've spoken with at least 20 households who would support a change. That's out of 75 total homes in the subdivision. That's more than enough. We need to call a special meeting of the homeowners association. According to the bylaws, any group of 25 members can petition for a special meeting, and the board has to comply within 30 days. How do we do that? I'll draft the petition. Can you help collect signatures? Absolutely. We've all been waiting for someone to stand up to her. Over the next few days, Dorothy and her network of fed-up neighbors collected signatures. By Monday, we had 38 households signed onto the petition demanding a special meeting to elect a new board and review all actions taken by Patricia in her role as sole board member. I delivered the petition to the HOA office personally. Jennifer looked at it with something like hope in her eyes. "She's going to be furious," Jennifer said. "I'm counting on it. She has to schedule the meeting within 30 days according to the bylaws. I want it in writing when and where it will be held. I'll make sure you get it." That afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local law firm, Sheriff Lawson. "This is Marcus Brennan from Brennan and Associates. I represent the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I'm calling to inform you that legal action will be taken against you if you continue your harassment of the HOA president and your violations of community standards." Marcus, let me save you some trouble. I'm also an attorney. Passed the bar 15 years ago, though I don't practice anymore. I know exactly what grounds you do and don't have for legal action. Tell your client that threatening me with baseless litigation is only going to make things worse for her. There was a surprised pause. I wasn't aware you had legal training. Most people aren't. Here's what you need to know. Your client has been operating the HOA in violation of its own bylaws for at least 2 years. She's had no properly constituted board, which means every decision she's made is potentially void. She's been harassing residents, including me, with trivial violations and excessive fines. She illegally seized my property without proper authorization, and she's currently defying a properly submitted petition for a special meeting. That's not the information I was given. Then you were lied to. I'd suggest you review the HOA bylaws and all actions taken by Miss Davenport very carefully before you proceed with any legal action on her behalf, because if you do, I'm going to file a countersuit for malicious prosecution, and I'm going to win." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I appreciate the heads up. I'll be reviewing the matter more carefully with my client." He hung up. I suspected Patricia's attorney was about to give her some very unwelcome news. Sure enough, 2 days later, Jennifer called me. "The special meeting is scheduled," she said. 2 weeks from this Saturday at 7 p.m. at the community center on Riverside Avenue. Patricia's really upset about it. I bet she is. Thanks for letting me know. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I contacted several neighbors who'd signed the petition and organized our strategy. We needed to elect at least 3 new board members to meet the bylaw requirements, and we needed to pass a motion overturning all of Patricia's unilateral decisions from the past 2 years. Dorothy agreed to run for president. A man named Robert Chen, who worked as an accountant, agreed to run for treasurer. A woman named Margaret Fleming, a retired teacher, agreed to run for secretary. All three were longtime residents with good reputations in the neighborhood. We also prepared a detailed report documenting every violation of the bylaws that Patricia had committed, complete with dates, evidence, and legal citations. I'd spent hours on it, and it was comprehensive. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. I'd expected maybe 40 or 50 people, but at least 65 residents showed up. Word had spread that something big was happening with the HOA, and people wanted to be part of it. Patricia stood at the front of the room, behind a folding table, looking like she was ready to go to war. She had her 3-inch binder open in front of her, and a gavel that she kept tapping impatiently. "This meeting will come to order," she announced, her voice sharp. "We're here because of a petition signed by certain residents who don't understand how HOAs function. I want to make it clear that this is a waste of everyone's time." "Point of order," I said, standing up. "This meeting was called by petition of the membership as allowed under Section 5.2 of the bylaws. The purpose is to elect a new board and review recent HOA actions. You're required to facilitate this meeting, not editorialize." Patricia glared at me. "You're out of order." "Actually, you are. The bylaws require board meetings to follow Robert's Rules of Order. Under those rules, the chair must remain neutral and allow proper procedure. You've already violated that by calling this meeting a waste of time." Several people in the crowd murmured agreement. Patricia's jaw tightened. "Fine. The floor is open for nominations for board positions." Dorothy stood up. "I nominate myself for president." "I nominate Robert Chen for treasurer," someone else called out. "I nominate Margaret Fleming for secretary," another voice added. "Any other nominations?" Patricia asked. When no one spoke, she continued, "I nominate myself for all 3 positions." "You can't do that," I said. Bylaws state each person can only hold 1 board position. They also state that if there aren't enough volunteers, positions can be combined. That's only after a good faith effort to recruit volunteers. We have 3 qualified candidates willing to serve. There's no need for combined positions. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue further, but she must have realized she was losing the room. "Fine. We'll vote. All in favor of Dorothy Henderson for president." Nearly every hand in the room went up. Even some of the people I'd thought were Patricia's supporters voted for Dorothy. "All in favor of me for president?" Patricia asked. Only 3 hands went up, including her own. The votes for treasurer and secretary went similarly. Robert and Margaret won by overwhelming margins. Patricia's face had gone from red to white. She looked stunned, like she couldn't believe what was happening. "Congratulations to the new board," she said stiffly. "I'll turn over all HOA materials to you by the end of the week." "We're not done yet," I said, standing again. "There's the matter of reviewing actions taken by the previous board, or rather, by you acting alone. Those actions were all legitimate and properly authorized." "No, they weren't." I pulled out my prepared report and began distributing copies around the room. "I've documented every violation of the bylaws you committed over the past 2 years. Operating without a properly constituted board. Authorizing expenditures without proper votes. Issuing fines without following the required warning and cure period processes. Seizing property without authorization." The list goes on. People started reading through the report, and I could see shock and anger spreading across their faces. "This is an attack," Patricia said. "He's trying to destroy the HOA because he doesn't want to follow simple rules." "I'm holding you accountable for your abuse of power," I replied. And I'm not the only one who's been harmed. According to my research, you've issued over $50,000 in fines over the past 2 years, most of them for minor or questionable violations. You've had vehicles towed, placed liens on properties, and harassed residents constantly. Those people violated the rules. Some of them did. Many of them didn't, or the violations were so minor they shouldn't have resulted in penalties, and in every case, you failed to follow proper procedure. Dorothy stood up, her elderly frame somehow imposing. I move that all fines and penalties issued by Patricia Davenport while acting as sole board member be reviewed by the new board, with authority to reduce or eliminate them as appropriate. Second, Robert Chen called out. All in favor? Dorothy asked. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only Patricia and her 2 supporters voted against it. I also move, I said, that the HOA engage an attorney to review the legality of all actions taken over the past 2 years and recommend whether any refunds or other remedies are appropriate. Second, someone called. That motion passed as well. Patricia gathered her binder and stood up. You people are destroying everything I've built. This neighborhood was perfect before you started interfering. Property values were up. Everyone followed the rules. Everything was orderly. Now you're going to turn it into chaos. No, Dorothy said gently. We're going to turn it into a community again. That's what it should have been all along. Patricia walked out, slamming the door behind her. The meeting continued for another hour, with the new board setting priorities and establishing procedures. It was decided that Jennifer would keep her job but would report to the full board, not just the president. It was also decided that the bylaws would be reviewed and amended to prevent any one person from having so much control in the future. As people were leaving, several residents came up to thank me. One man shook my hand vigorously. You don't know how bad it's been, he said. Last year she fined me $500 because my grass was 3 inches tall instead of 2.5. I had been out of town taking care of my sick mother. She didn't care. A woman told me about getting fined for having a garden gnome in her front yard that wasn't on the approved decorations list. Another man had been threatened with a lien because his house number was in brass instead of the required black metal. The stories went on, painting a picture of a neighborhood that had been under the thumb of a petty tyrant for years. I drove home that night feeling satisfied. Justice had been served, democracy had prevailed, and Patricia Davenport had been removed from power. I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. The following Tuesday, I was at my office in the county courthouse when I got a call from Dorothy. Paul, we have a problem. Patricia cleaned out the HOA bank accounts before she left. What? Jennifer went to check the accounts this morning and they're empty, all of them. The operating account, the reserve account, everything, over $80,000 is gone. I felt cold anger settling into my stomach. Has Jennifer filed a police report? Not yet. She called me first. I wanted to talk to you before we involved the police. This is embezzlement. It needs to be reported immediately. Tell Jennifer to file a report with the Duluth Police Department and have her bring all the financial records she has access to. I'll make some calls. I hung up and immediately contacted the Detective Division of the Duluth PD. While this wasn't my jurisdiction directly, it involved a resident of the county and significant theft. Detective Sarah Williams agreed to handle the case personally. Within hours, the investigation was underway. Bank records showed that Patricia had transferred all the HOA funds to her personal account the day after the special meeting, then immediately moved most of it to an account in the Cayman Islands. She'd planned this. She knew she was going to lose control of the HOA and had set up an escape route for the money. Detective Williams obtained a warrant and went to Patricia's house that evening. I went with her, though I stayed in the background since it wasn't technically my case. Patricia answered the door looking calm and composed, like she'd been expecting this. "Miss Davenport, I'm Detective Williams with the Duluth Police Department. I have a warrant for your arrest for embezzlement and theft." "I didn't steal anything," Patricia said coolly. "That money was owed to me for 8 years of volunteer work managing the HOA. I calculated my time at $50 an hour, which is more than reasonable for professional management services." "The HOA didn't authorize payment for your services," Detective Williams said. "And you can't simply decide to pay yourself without board approval. I was the board. You were operating illegally without a properly constituted board, which means you had no authority to authorize any payments, especially to yourself." Patricia's cool facade cracked slightly. "You can't prove intent to steal. I genuinely believed I was entitled to that money." "We'll let a jury decide that. You're under arrest." Detective Williams read Patricia her rights and handcuffed her. As she was being led to the police car, Patricia looked directly at me. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You couldn't just follow the rules. You had to destroy everything." "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "You did that yourself when you decided to steal from your neighbors." Patricia was taken to jail and I went home, but the case was far from over. Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded. Forensic accountants went through the HOA's financial records and discovered that Patricia had been skimming money for at least 3 years, not just the one-time withdrawal after the meeting. Small amounts here and there, disguised as legitimate expenses but actually going straight to her pocket. All told, she'd stolen over $120,000. She'd also been taking kickbacks from contractors she hired for HOA projects. The towing company that removed my snowmobile. They'd been paying her a percentage of every vehicle they impounded. The landscaping company that maintained the common areas. Same thing. The snow removal service, the painting contractor, even the company that printed the HOA newsletters. Everyone was paying Patricia under the table, and in return, she made sure they got exclusive contracts regardless of whether they were the best or cheapest option. It was a comprehensive corruption scheme that had been running for years, and no one had caught it because Patricia controlled all the information, and no one had thought to question her. The case went to trial 6 months later. I attended when I could, watching as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the evidence. Patricia's defense was that she'd been providing a valuable service to the community and deserved compensation, but the jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts: embezzlement, theft by swindle, wire fraud, and money laundering. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus penalties and interest. Her house was seized to help cover the debt, along with her car and most of her other assets. The money in the Cayman Islands account was frozen and eventually recovered, though it took nearly a year of legal wrangling. As for the HOA, Dorothy and the new board worked hard to rebuild trust in the community. They simplified the bylaws, reducing them from over 100 pages to a reasonable 20. They focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood events and created a reserve fund for emergency repairs. Most of the fines Patricia had issued were either reduced or eliminated entirely after review. The man whose grass had been too tall got his $500 back. The woman with the garden gnome was told she could keep it. My snowmobile violation was formally expunged from the records, though I'd already moved it into my garage by then anyway. The neighborhood became a genuinely nice place to live. People actually talked to each other instead of living in fear of violation notices. Kids played in the streets without worrying about noise complaints. Holiday decorations went up without requiring approval from the decorations committee, which had been disbanded. About a year after Patricia's sentencing, I was out shoveling my driveway after a heavy snowfall when Dorothy walked over, carrying a plate of cookies. "Thought you might need these," she said with a smile. "Thanks." I took the plate and bit into a chocolate chip cookie. It was excellent. "How are things going with the HOA?" "Smooth as can be. We actually have people volunteering to serve on committees now. Can you imagine that? Volunteers. After years of no one wanting to touch anything HOA related because they didn't want to deal with Patricia. That's great to hear. I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. If you hadn't stood up to her, she'd still be running things and stealing from all of us." "I just wanted my snowmobile back," I said with a laugh. "You did more than that. You saved this neighborhood." Dorothy patted my arm. "We're lucky to have you here, Sheriff." After she left, I stood in my driveway for a moment, looking around at the peaceful suburban street. Snow was falling gently, coating everything in white. A few houses down, I could see kids building a snowman. Across the street, someone was stringing lights on their porch, even though it was February and nowhere near any holiday. It was exactly what a neighborhood should be. A place where people lived their lives without fear, without constant surveillance and petty enforcement, without someone on a power trip making everyone miserable. I thought about Patricia, sitting in prison, probably still convinced that she'd been right and everyone else was wrong. People like her never really understood. They thought control and order were the same thing, that rules mattered more than people, that their authority gave them the right to do whatever they wanted. But authority comes with responsibility, and responsibility means using power to help people, not to aggrandize yourself or satisfy your need for control. I'd learned that lesson early in my law enforcement career, and it had served me well through 20 years as a cop, and then as sheriff. The badge didn't make me better than anyone else. It gave me the tools to protect people and enforce reasonable laws, but it came with the obligation to use those tools wisely and fairly. Patricia had forgotten that, if she'd ever known it at all, and it had cost her everything. I finished shoveling my driveway and went inside. My phone buzzed with a work message. There was a situation developing in the northern part of the county that needed my attention. I grabbed my gear and headed out, my snowmobile secured safely in the garage where it belonged. The case of Patricia Davenport and the Pine Ridge Estates, HOA, became something of a legend in local law enforcement circles. Other sheriffs and police chiefs would mention it at conferences, usually as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of financial oversight in community organizations. A few journalists wrote articles about it, focusing on the dramatic elements of an HOA president embezzling from her own neighborhood and getting caught by the sheriff she tried to bully. But for me, it was just another reminder that justice doesn't always come easy, and sometimes you have to fight for it even in the most unexpected places. I'd expected to deal with criminals and difficult cases in my work as sheriff. I hadn't expected to have to fight a battle in my own driveway against someone wielding HOA bylaws like weapons. Life is unpredictable that way. The Pine Ridge Estates subdivision continued to thrive under its new leadership. Property values actually increased, not because of strict enforcement of arbitrary rules, but because people genuinely wanted to live in a neighborhood that felt like a real community. The houses were well maintained because people took pride in their homes, not because they feared fines. The streets were safe because neighbors looked out for each other, not because of constant surveillance. As for my snowmobile, I used it every winter for the next several years, taking it out on the trails around Duluth and up into the North Woods. It never spent another night in my driveway, though. I always parked it in the garage, not because I was afraid of HOA violations, but because it was better for the machine and kept it safe from theft. Sometimes, I'd see that first violation notice in my files and remember the whole saga. The anger I'd felt watching my snowmobile being towed away, the frustration of dealing with Patricia's intransigence, the satisfaction of watching justice prevail. It reminded me why I'd gotten into law enforcement in the first place, why I'd worked my way up from beat cop to sheriff over 2 decades. The law exists to protect people and create order in society, but it can be twisted and abused by those who see it as a tool for personal power. My job was to prevent that abuse, whether it came from criminals, corrupt officials, or HOA presidents who'd forgotten they were supposed to serve their communities, not rule over them. Patricia Davenport served 6 years of her 8-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to Florida after her release, where she lived quietly in a condo. I had no idea if she'd learned anything from her experience or if she still believed she'd been wronged. I chose not to care. She'd paid her debt to society, and what she did with her life afterward was her business as long as she stayed away from Pine Ridge Estates. The HOA saga also had an unexpected effect on my reputation in the county. People who'd been hesitant to approach the sheriff's office with problems suddenly felt more comfortable coming forward. If the sheriff would stand up to an HOA president over a snowmobile, maybe he'd listen to their concerns about other issues too. My office received more complaints, more tips, more cooperation from citizens who felt like law enforcement actually cared about their problems. Some of those tips led to major cases. One concerned citizen who'd been emboldened by the HOA case came forward with information about a drug trafficking ring operating out of a warehouse in the county. Another provided evidence of a contracting fraud scheme that had been stealing from elderly residents. The ripple effects of standing up to Patricia Davenport went far beyond one neighborhood or one HOA. It showed people that authority figures could be held accountable, that citizens had power when they organized and stood up for themselves, and that the law applied equally to everyone regardless of their position or perceived authority. Years later, when I was thinking about retiring, I looked back on my career and tried to identify the cases I was most proud of. There were big ones, of course. The murder investigation that resulted in 3 convictions. The corruption case that cleaned up the county building department. The drug task force that dismantled a major distribution network. But the HOA case always stood out, not because it was the most serious or the most complex, but because it was the most personal. It started with me just wanting my property back, just wanting to be left alone to live my life in peace. It ended with a corrupt official in prison, a neighborhood transformed, and a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought in our own backyards. I never regretted buying that house in Pine Ridge Estates, despite all the drama. It became a real home in a real community, filled with real neighbors who looked out for each other. Dorothy became a good friend, bringing me cookies and inviting me to neighborhood barbecues. Robert and Margaret ran the HOA efficiently and fairly, proving that community governance could work when done by people who actually cared about the community. And my snowmobile. It gave me years of reliable service, carrying me through the Minnesota winters on countless adventures. Every time I fired it up and headed out to the trails, I thought about that morning when I'd watched it being towed away, and I smiled. because Patricia Davenport had made one critical mistake when she decided to target me. She'd assumed that authority came from position and paperwork, from bylaws and regulations. She'd forgotten that real authority comes from legitimacy, from acting within the law and serving the interests of others rather than yourself. I had a badge and a gun, sure, but those were just tools. My real authority came from being duly elected by the citizens of the county, from upholding the law fairly and equally, from protecting and serving rather than commanding and controlling. Patricia never understood that distinction. She thought her title as HOA president gave her the right to do whatever she wanted. She thought rules existed to empower her rather than to create a fair and just framework for everyone. She was wrong, and she paid the price for that mistake. The story of the HOA and my snowmobile became part of the folklore of Pine Ridge Estates, told and retold at neighborhood gatherings, embellished slightly with each retelling. In some versions, I'd threatened to arrest Patricia on the spot during our first confrontation. In others, the trial was far more dramatic than it actually was. But the core truth remained the same. A corrupt HOA president had tried to bully the wrong person and ended up in prison for her crimes. I didn't mind the embellishments. Stories need drama, and if my neighbors wanted to make me into more of a hero than I actually was, that was fine. The important thing was that they remembered the lesson. No one, regardless of their position, is above the law or beyond accountability. As I eventually prepared to retire from my position as sheriff, I thought about the legacy I wanted to leave. It wasn't about the number of arrests, or the conviction rate, or any of the statistics that administrators care about. It was about whether I'd made a difference in people's lives, whether I'd used my authority wisely and fairly, whether I'd left things better than I found them. The Pine Ridge Estates case was a perfect example of what I'd tried to do throughout my career. Stand up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Hold people accountable when they abuse power. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Serve the community rather than rule over it. Patricia Davenport taught me an important lesson, though probably not the one she intended. She reminded me that corruption and abuse of power can happen anywhere, even in places as mundane as a suburban HOA. She showed me that vigilance is always necessary, because those who crave power will always find ways to seize it if no one stops them. But she also reminded me of something more positive, that ordinary people, when they organize and stand together, have tremendous power to create change. The residents of Pine Ridge Estates could have continued living under Patricia's thumb indefinitely, grumbling about violations but never doing anything about it. Instead, they came together, supported each other, and took back control of their own community. That was democracy in action, in its purest and most effective form. My snowmobile was eventually replaced by a newer model, and then another one after that. I wore out several vehicles over the years, enjoying the trails and the freedom they provided. But I never forgot that first Polaris, or the drama it caused, or the lessons learned from fighting an HOA president who thought she was untouchable. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they start with something as simple as where you park your snowmobile. Because it's never really about the snowmobile or the property or the specific rule being violated. It's about principles, about rights, about whether we're willing to stand up when someone tries to push us around. I was willing to stand up, and it made all the difference.